versus, like you've mentioned in the podcast or the copywriting space, all right, it's able to produce X amount, in a reduced time. But what does that actually mean in terms of how now the augmented role is valued versus how much it costs to, adopt such technology?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about a recent business case that was created by one of our larger clients to get a contract approved. So the way they looked at it was, so this is a large staffing agency to contextualize, and what they did was they looked at the parts of the process that Popp would completely kind of automate. And then they looked at the additional operational burden of operating Popp, right? And they balanced the two out. And then they looked at like how much time exactly we would be saving in terms of human capital and the cost of that human capital. And that was versus, so that was, they looked at two cases, a Popp augmented team and a human only team. And in that case, we saw that for the same activity, for the same output, a Popp augmented team was 8.2 times cheaper. So that's the way that the business case was generated in our case. But that also took into account the additional operational burden of somebody actually operating the technology as well. So that's just a real example.
Yeah, so I think on the IT side, certainly in the food distribution business, the IT costs are fixed. There's some marginality in it, but really not that much. So I'm already paying. The business is already paying for the basic platform I need to actually then bring an AI assistant in. So, given that's a fixed cost largely, it's then £30 a month. So I've got 5 employees, £30 a month, so 150 quids, a month that I'm going to be paying. I've got 2 BAs, I've got 2 sales guys, and I've got a marketing person, right? So we at the board have agreed that we're going to make that investment. So it's a very small, low order of magnitude. What we haven't yet worked out is how we're going to KPI the people that are getting it. Because if it's £30 a month for a Copilot license, and my copywriter is generating 5x more copy, am I seeing a direct correlation in sales volume as a result of that? Am I reaching more people on social? Is that translating into business? And we haven't got that science down yet, right? So we're going to be experimenting with this. So our approach is relatively toe in the water, not upsetting the cost base too much until, to your point, we can prove some sort of stellar results. And if you're getting sort of 8, 10, 15, 20x, this looks like a no-brainer, right? So I think there's a degree of expectation that needs to be set with the management team that this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, this is how we're going to measure it, and if we think we get the results that we expect, we'll dial the volume up in some determined period of time, right? So with us, it's a case of slowly into the water, not upsetting the cost base too much, and then trying to figure out how we would measure a successful return on that investment.
So we're all marking our own homework, right? So we're all
it's very true.
Amazing ROI. So one of the first clients we worked with, we worked out that the average in the industry for retained executive search was £170,000 a year worth of revenue, and they were exceeding £300,000. Brilliant! It's all down to us. It's wonderful. And then sort of, in conversation, it's like, we're incorporating the fact that we're using this AI in our pitch, so we think we're winning new business. Is that really down to us, or is that just a little cherry on the top of they're doing something? Or we managed to recruit and retain some more people because this is an interesting. Is that really us, or is that? So I think the point is, and this kind of very much is, it's really, in many cases, quite early at the moment to be able to say exactly what it is. And therefore, I do agree that kind of that experimental approach, which I know particularly an organisation like yours is quite uncomfortable for a large organisation, where you give people the room to, frankly, try and fail at various different things to really kind of see where you're getting the adoption. And there's kind of at least 3 of us in startups here all you care about the early days is, can you find users? Do they love your product? And that, I think, inside the business, if you think in terms of those, then the cost benefits ultimately come as a result.
Yeah, I think from an enterprise perspective, taking lots of little bits at a stage like this, of the technology is probably where you should be, rather than sort of jumping head first into a big project, seeing what sort of plays out. We've historically delivered some quite large projects that have, well, POCs that have looked really great to start with. I did one for Saudi Aramco last year, which is I think about as big as you get in terms of POCs. And then they decided absolutely that they didn't want to go with it, just because generative AI was still not quite where they needed it to be for this particular thing to actually operationalize. So again, you know, with anything Gen AI, that there is always that slight concern, particularly if you're a business of a certain scale and the output needs to be doing something that's really critical in terms of what it does. So I don't know, that's something that could always play into my mind if I was making those decisions.
So a question from a board of director perspective. So for organizations whose boards are reading about this, learning about cautionary tales in the media, things like that, what are the kinds of thoughtful questions that a board of directors should be asking, in your view, about how a company is applying AI tools?
So I spend a reasonable amount of time speaking to boards. So I think the first thing is that boards educating themselves is absolutely critical. And in particular, Europe has a history of poorly educated boards as far as technology is concerned, tend to be absolutely fine on from a financial perspective, on technology, typically poor. So being well enough educated to be able to ask the right questions is 100% groundwork, I think. I think then following on from there, it has to be, you know, is this an existential threat for us as a company, or is it an ability to then go and be a disruptor in our particular space? Or are we somewhere sitting in between that? And therefore, you know, what is the appropriate level of attention that the exec team should be paying to this in these areas? And I think the other part in terms of governance, which I know you touched on earlier, is really in that kind of risk management part. Yeah. You know, let's not go and put generative AI in charge of turning oil refineries on and off. Let's go and start with the stuff that's really going to be able to kind of look at what's going there. And I think, you know, the board thinking about AI, and particularly the more recent generations of AI that look like they'll be really transformative, and keeping a close eye on making sure that it doesn't wipe them out, but that they're not the laggards in the space, because it's definitely, I think, the case that the ones who are experimenting early will be able to go and see the benefits from it.
I've got a view on this. I think it's a twofold. I think the first thing is, so if we're in a boardroom, we can get the board very excited about what we're building. That we don't find difficult. What we do find difficult is when the board hasn't consulted with the people who are actually going to be using it on a day-to-day basis. So the question I would be asking, are you on the board of directors?
No, but I work with them on the questions they should be asking us, and then we document those.
Okay, got it. So question number one, where are the people that are using this, and how quickly can we get them into the boardroom, right? Because that helps everyone. That helps you. It also helps us. Because if we get into that room and we've waited, you know, everybody's waited a month to get a meeting with the board, and everyone's in the room, all the decision makers are in the room, and then we do a great demo, and then a month later we have all the operators in the room and they say, we can't use this, they're not excited, then suddenly we've wasted 2 months of everyone's time. Right. The sooner that we can get the ones who are actually going to be using it into the conversation, folded in and exposed to what we're doing, the better for everyone. So that's the first thing. The second thing is really looking at those companies that are ready for the regulations or ready for the incoming legislation, because there's a lot of cowboys in this space, and you really want to be inquiring about, you know, are they hitting the points on the EU AI Act that are really relevant for us. Recruitment is a high risk application, so there are 4 areas that we're expecting to be quizzed on, and often we're not, and actually we end up offering that information anyway.
Right.
But there are lots of companies in our space that are just You know, that data is it's totally non-compliant with any regulation, and you know, there's no transparency about the way AI is being used. There's no explainability. You know, there's no human oversight, and they're breaking basically all of the rules that are going to come into force in 2 years.
Yeah, so there's sorry, just make a point. So I sit on the Technology Advisory Board for the British Heart Foundation, have done for the past 3 years. And two observations, and you touched on this already. One is governance. As a board member and as a custodian of the organisation, your mission is to make sure that the governance and policy frameworks are up to date and correct for a technology that is potentially as disruptive as this. Secondly, we're about to employ a trustee. So we're going to hire a trustee specifically to look at the technology elements of the work the BHF does and also the AI elements of that. Because whilst it's nominally a charity, the British Heart Foundation funds medical research in this country to the tune of about £120 million a year. There's a whole side of that business which is regulated in areas I don't even pretend to understand, but where a trustee coming in to look at the implications of us developing an app which gets into the general public's hands, which assists with the use of a defibrillator, that's a fun one, right? So governance, and as a board, you know, as a board individual, absolutely drive that home, and two, maybe look at a trustee who's responsible for that side of it, right? I think that could be quite useful.
So related to your point on transparency of the technology, when it processes or digests people's data, and related to your point on job applicants, do companies have an obligation to say that your CV is actually being processed by an AI tool? And do you recommend, if that's the case, should job applicants have a standard CV and a CV for AI screening technology that can